Welcome everyone to my Skirk build guide. Skirk is an upcoming character in version 5.7, and in this build guide, I will briefly go over Skirk's combat abilities, then go over Skirk's artifact options for her different playstyles, then main and substats, and lastly, weapons. Keep in mind that Skirk is not officially released yet, and therefore many things are still subject to change. Information in this video is only up to date as of the making of this video. And without further ado, Skirk is a 5-star cryo damage dealer. She scales on attack, wields a sword, and has a crit damage ascension bonus. Skirk is the second character in the game, after Mavwika, to not use elemental energy, and instead relies on her Serpent's subtlety points. Up to 100 of these points can be stored, and to use her burst, Skirk needs 50. Serpent's subtlety can be gained through her elemental skill, which grants 45 points, or through her first passive. This passive generates a void rift when a party member triggers Frozen, Superconduct, Cryo Swirl, or Crystallize. 3 void rifts can be created and can be absorbed by Skirk through performing certain actions, each granting 8 Serpent subtlety points. Her normal attacks in their regular form are nothing special, although they can be enhanced through her elemental skill. Skirk's elemental skill can be either tapped or held, with both versions granting 45 Serpent's subtlety points. When tapped, Skirk will switch to the 7-phase flash mode, in which her normal, charged, and plunging attacks will be converted to deal cryo damage, which cannot be overridden. The damage multiplier is also tied to her skill's level. The 7-phase flash mode's duration is dependent on the number of Serpent's subtlety points, and has a maximum possible duration of 12.5 seconds, much like Natlan characters and their Night Soul's Blessing. Holding Skirk's skill will just grant the Serpent's subtlety points and enhance her exploration abilities for a set duration. Skirk's burst has 2 forms, a regular form and a special form. It can only be accessed after using her skill and entering the 7-phase flash mode. The regular burst, which requires 50 Serpent subtlety points, will deal AoE cryo damage. Each Serpent subtlety point over 50 will also increase the damage dealt. Up to 12 points can be accounted for, which can be easily achieved by consuming void rifts. The special burst in the 7-phase flash mode does not require Serpent's subtlety points, and instead increases her normal attack damage based on the number of void rifts consumed. Void rifts can be consumed by either using her special burst, using a charged attack during the 7-phase flash mode, or holding Skirk's elemental skill. As for the rest of Skirk's kit, her second passive will grant a stack when a Hydro or Cryo party member, aside from Skirk, deals Hydro or Cryo damage. Each teammate can only grant 1 stack, with each stack increasing the damage dealt by Skirk's normal attacks in the 7-phase flash mode, or the damage dealt by her regular burst. In place of a regular utility passive, Skirk has a bonus passive that increases all party members' elemental skill level, in the same way that Child's passive increases normal attack level. However, this does require all party members to be either Hydro or Cryo, with at least 1 of each. This passive will not only increase Skirk's damage in the 7-phase flash mode, but also increases the damage of teammates such as Furina or Escoffier. With that out of the way, Skirk is a damage dealer that can be played either as an on-field main DPS or quick swap burst DPS. By tapping her skill, Skirk can switch to the 7-phase flash mode, where her normal attacks will be infused with cryo, and deal even more damage if you only have Cryo and Hydro party members. Holding her skill, however, can just grant you the 45 Serpent's subtlety points without entering the 7-phase flash mode. This way, you can use her regular burst. If you want Skirk to deal the most damage possible, playing her as an on-field main DPS is usually the way to go. However, a quick swap burst DPS can have its uses, such as playing her with another damage dealer, where you would swap between these characters to use their bursts or relevant skills. This can have its uses and can be viable for some content. Skirk's signature artifact set also supports this by buffing both playstyles separately. I will be going over her playstyles more in a full guide, but for the purposes of this build guide, I'll just be going over how you can build Skirk for either playstyle. As for the team I'll be using for these calculations, it'll include both Furina and Escoffier for the damage buffs and the personal damage both characters deal, and a last free slot with either a Hydro or Cryo character. Calculations in this build guide are for team DPS, so gaps will appear smaller than they would normally be for Skirk's personal damage. Playing Skirk in freeze teams, or teams that just include Hydro and Cryo party members, is usually the way to go. Playing her in other archetypes, such as Melt, is not that great for Skirk as it doesn't allow her to fully stack her passives, and the Melt reaction itself does not even generate Void Rifts for Skirk to absorb. Moving on to artifacts, as an on-field damage dealer, Skirk's best set can depend on the enemy you're facing or your teammates. If the enemy is freezable, the Blizzard Strayer set becomes Skirk's best in slot by a small margin. The 40% bonus crit rate is very hard to beat. However, if the enemy is not freezable, this set's performance will slightly drop, although it will still be viable to use. And if you already have a good Blizzard Strayer set, you can still use it, and don't have to go out of your way to farm another set. Marechaussee Hunter with Furina is another solid pick, only slightly behind Blizzard Strayer, since it provides 36% total crit rate instead of Blizzard Strayer's 40% crit rate. If you're not running Furina in your team and the enemy is not freezable, Finale of the Deep Galleries is Skirk's next best option. This set increases cryo damage, and the 4-piece bonus will activate if the character has 0 energy. This will always be the case for Skirk, since she doesn't use elemental energy. The 4-piece bonus will increase normal attack and burst damage bonus. However, only one effect can apply at a time, as dealing normal attack damage will disable the burst damage bonus, and vice versa. The gap between these 3 sets isn't large and can be easily made up with better pieces. Blizzard Strayer has the highest potential damage if the enemy is freezable, which is not always the case, especially against bosses in the Abyss, while Marechaussee Hunter requires Furina to be in the team. Finale of the Deep Galleries deals slightly less damage than both, but has fewer caveats, so I would usually recommend just running whichever set you have better pieces for. I also want to note that since both Blizzard Strayer and Marechaussee Hunter increase crit rate, it can make building Skirk potentially more difficult if you have her signature weapon, since that also increases crit rate and you don't want to overcap on crit rate. Other sets that increase normal attack damage are also viable, such as Gladiator's Finale, Desert Pavilion Chronicle, Echoes of an Offering, or even Heart of Depth. If you have a shielder like Sitlali or the upcoming Dahlia, Retracing Bolide can also potentially work. If you're playing Skirk as a burst DPS, the same applies, except that Finale of the Deep Galleries becomes just slightly better than Marechaussee Hunter, since Marechaussee Hunter's 2-piece specifically increases normal and charged attack damage, not burst or cryo damage. Moving on to stats, we can skip energy recharge requirements, since Skirk does not use elemental energy. So as for main stats, for your Sands, you would want attack. For your Goblet, cryo damage bonus is usually the best option, but with Furina's damage bonus buff, and if you're using the Finale of the Deep Galleries set, attack becomes a very viable option. And the gap is small enough that you can usually just use whichever piece has the better substats. An attack goblet can potentially be better if you're using a weapon that provides a lot of damage bonuses, such as Haran Geppaku Futsu or Mist Splitter Reforged. It also works the other way around. If you're using a weapon that provides a lot of attack, such as Finale of the Deep, a cryo goblet is usually better. As for your circlet, you would want crit rate or crit damage. With the cryo resonance, you'd be gaining 15% crit rate against frozen enemies, or enemies affected by cryo. So you wouldn't want to have more than 85% crit rate. Both Blizzard Strayer and Mauritius Hunter increase crit rate, so you wouldn't want to have more than 45% crit rate on Blizzard Strayer and 49% on Mauritius. As for substats, you'll want crit rate, crit damage, and attack. Energy recharge does not do anything, and Skirk is not really dealing damage through elemental reactions, so elemental mastery is not needed either. Moving on to weapons, Skirk's best in slot will be her signature weapon, Azure Light. This weapon has a base attack of 674 and increases crit rate by 22.1%. As for its effect, after the equipping character uses their skill, attack will be increased by 24% for 12 seconds, which is enough to almost cover the maximum possible duration of the 7-phase flash mode. Additionally, if the current energy is 0 during this effect, attack will be further increased by another 24%, and crit damage increased by 40%. Overall, a pretty solid weapon, although not that far ahead of other 5-star options. And Skirk also has multiple strong 4-star options, with some of the strongest being free weapons. Additionally, this weapon can serve as a pretty universal stat stick for most attack scaling sword users, as it gives crit rate and some attack. Maybe not as universal as Mistsplitter or Primordial Jade Cutter, but still decent enough. If you're using Skirk as an on-fielder, the next best option would be Haran Gapaku Futsu, followed closely by Mistsplitter Reforged, Primordial Jade Cutter, and Summit Shaper if you're using a shielder like Sitlali or Dahlia. In regards to Mistsplitter Reforged, the third stack of this weapon's effect will happen if the current energy is less than 100%, which should always be the case with Skirk, since she doesn't use energy to begin with. But in case the effect does not trigger, it would still be a pretty decent option. Other 5-star options, such as Absolution and Uraku Misugiri, are also viable and strong weapons to use on Skirk. As for 4 stars, the event weapon Calamity of Aishu is a very strong 4-star option for increasing Skirk's normal attack damage. However, it requires having a shielder, which might not always be the case. Finale of the Deep, the Fontaine Craftable Sword, is another strong option, and one that can be obtained for free. This sword gives a lot of attack, but requires having a healer like Escoffier or Charlotte. Between the Battle Pass weapons, the Black Sword is much better for an on-fielder, since it increases normal attack damage. If you're playing Skirk as a quick swap burst DPS, weapons that require being on field to stack a buff, or ones that increase normal attack damage, won't be as strong, but you can still keep using them. Wolffang, the Battle Pass weapon, becomes much better for burst damage, since that's what it increases. And that's all from this guide. Skirk is finally coming out in the next patch after being revealed in Fontaine, so I'm pretty excited for her to become playable. Thank you for making it till the end, and thanks for watching.